now I want your calls on this, a really important subject and the subject of the day, really. Do you think there should be a referendum on assisted dying? 0207 862 2222 is the number to give us a ring. MPs are voting today for the first time in a decade on whether or not they progress the assisted dying bill, which will give people in certain circumstances the right to choose to end their own life. Now, this morning, Jeremy spoke to Dame Esther Rantzen, who has been campaigning for the law to change, and he asked her if she wanted the public to have a say in it.
So what's your message then to MPs today, Esther?
My message to MPs is this is your choice. I'm not going to say vote one way or the other because I believe in choice. And choice is what this bill is about. So how you vote is up to your conscience. But obviously for some of us, it's a very, very real and immediate decision. And we're hoping that it goes the right way.
If it doesn't, would you think there's a case for a referendum on it?
Referendums are brilliant, aren't they? They bring people together and they're such a good idea and you get wonderful results. No, thank you. Kind offer, but no, I think.
So Esther isn't keen on everyone having the vote on this issue. But Imarn, you actually feel like a referendum on this would be a good thing?
Oh, I think it would be an excellent thing. It's such an important topic. I just think there are certain things that should not just be left to a few hundred MPs of power, especially with the track record that we've seen from most of them. So I would argue that this should be in the hands of the public. We should all be able to decide because this is our fate that we are referring to. And I think it would be a really good way to just kind of get everyone on an equal kind of playing field in terms of how we feel about the issue, as opposed to it just being MPs and MPs rule the roost. There's 69 million people in England alone. It's just...
There's very few things that we can guarantee will affect every single person living in this country. Death is one thing we can guarantee is coming to us all. And therefore, perhaps this is a vote and this is a subject that the people should have a say on.
Well, I'm not into referendums either. I think, referendums pitch people against each other. The reason why we have our parliamentary system is because a community sends an MP to Parliament and then they represent you and the constituents, and that's where all laws should be decided. I'm not into things like the Supreme Court taking over decisions. I'm not into outside bodies having influence on Parliament. It should all be done in Parliament. I am for this assisted dying bill. A mate of mine had stomach cancer. He was on morphine, and one time when I went to see him, the morphine started wearing off, and there's nothing dignified about seeing a grown man rolling around on the floor, clutching his stomach and crying. It was a shocking end, and in the end, I'm pretty convinced he OD'd on morphine just to get out of it, and it was a relief to all of us.
So wouldn't you want a say on that then, Mike?
Well, no, because I think it's got to be debated in Parliament, but then I would go with the democratic vote, but I'm perfectly sure in my own head which way I would vote, and that is for an assisted dying bill.
OK, I do want to speak to somebody now who is in Westminster outside the building where the MPs are debating this very issue. This is Dave Sowry, who travelled with his wife Christy to Switzerland so that she could end her life at Dignitas, which is an assisted dying clinic. Dave, this must be just an incredibly emotional day for you. Obviously, your thoughts are going to be with Christy on this day. Can you tell us a little bit about her and her story?
Well, I accompanied my wife Christy to Dignitas in Switzerland 2 years ago. She had MS and she was severely disabled. And her words were, "I can't go on. I'm not prepared to live this difficult and painful life anymore." The palliative care that was on offer to her was purely morphine. And for her, she would have been living in a drug-induced fog. And in her words, she said, "My only role in life will soon be to be a full-time invalid. And for me, that means being invalid." So she made the difficult decision to end her life at Dignitas.
And you went along with her. What was that like for you?
Surreal, extraordinary, in the true sense of the word, extraordinary. Obviously, I've never done anything like that before, so it is difficult to describe. It was profound, and she was very calm. she'd made a decision, was very accepting of that decision. But she was worried about what would happen to me when I got back, interviewed by the police, etc.
We have a picture of your wife. I think it was taken in Switzerland just the day before her passing, and she does look very relaxed in that photo. And she looks very well, and that might surprise a lot of people. But I imagine she would be incredibly worried about you and the impact legally that going with her, accompanying her to Switzerland would have on you. What were the repercussions, can I ask?
I did report to the police when I got back to London. I'd read the Crown Prosecution Service guidelines, and it seemed to me that that was the best way to go forward. I also didn't want this hanging over me for months, maybe years, and maybe naively I thought they would be unlikely to prosecute. But it turns out I was right. But also when I got home, it was not really top of my agenda. It was whatever was going to happen was going to happen, and I was just lost my wife.
It didn't seem important then. I'm wondering, I mean, obviously, I'm presuming that you're hoping this bill is going to pass today. If it doesn't go your way, would you like to see a referendum?
I'm not a fan of referendums in themselves. It's very difficult to frame a question that's open-minded. If the bill does fail, which I obviously hope it doesn't, then maybe there would be an option if a referendum was phrased around, should we set up a citizens' assembly to discuss this, and for Parliament to have a second go at this. It is difficult for MPs. We expect them to have a fully formed opinion on every topic. And here is something that is very profound for all of them, but they have to balance up their role as representatives of us, our constituents, and all the polls suggest that the public is in favour of the change in the law. They've got to balance that with their own personal principles.
Okay, well, I'll let you get back to the protest, Dave, but thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for sharing Christy and your own story with us as well. Thank you very much for your time. We'll go to the calls now and see how you at home feel, whether you would be happy to have a referendum on assisted dying. Becca from the West Midlands, you're up first. Do you think a referendum is the way to go on this?
Yeah, I think everybody should have their voice heard. Do you know what I mean? I lost my granddad to lung.
I do. I just wonder, it is such an emotive subject and everybody has their own experiences on it. I do wonder whether we can be objective in our individual views of it, and whether we can think about the unintended consequences that may result in a change of law, whether we're capable of doing that, because it is such a highly emotive subject.
I do, because I think if my granddad had been given that choice, do you know what I mean? I would never have experienced the smell of death. I would never be in the trauma I'm still in now, 14 years down the line. To know that my granddad was having neat oxygen pumped into his brain, so we were waiting for either his heart to pack up or his brain to pack up, to the point that we were sworn not to move sheets because rigor mortis had set in his body. He was black, the room stunk. I cannot even sleep 14 years down the line because of witnessing that. Do you know what I mean? So actually, in one sense, do you know what I mean? To have that choice and not to actually sit there and wait, do you know what I mean? The trauma it's impacted on my family.
It sounds absolutely awful and incredibly traumatic. I have no idea what your grandfather's illness was or what the cause of death was, but I know that there will be some palliative doctors out there that will say that you should never have been left in that situation, that shouldn't have occurred, that actually what we need in this country is better palliative care in that situation. Do you find any agreement in that statement at all?
Again, palliative care does need to improve in this country, but my granddad had lung cancer. He was never going to recover from it. It was just going to get worse and worse, do you know what I mean? And actually, the most kindest thing to have done would have to be put into sleep. We wouldn't do that to a dog.
That's exactly
And I
my
understand
point.
the other side of the
Exactly my
argument.
point.
I have a disabled child. Do you know what I mean? And I understand the vulnerability it can bring there too. But there is no way on this earth we should be leaving a human being in that state.
Becca, thank you
So
very
I do
much
believe it should be a referendum.
for sharing your experiences. Stella from Wiltshire, what's your thoughts on a referendum on assisted dying? Do you think it should just be down to our MPs? They are elected, we voted them in. Do we trust them to make the right decision?
Hi there. I really don't think we can leave this massive, mega decision on the shoulders of MPs that have just got in after 5 months, after Conservative rule over this amount of time. I personally believe that it's like backdoor euthanasia. I believe that we ended the death penalty in 1965 for a reason. And all of a sudden, there's about how many people in this country? In 2022, they said it was like 65 million, so I don't know what it is now. But we cannot give that. Yeah, exactly. But we can't give that mega decision on those people's shoulders where people didn't even vote for them in the first place. It's like, nobody should decide who should live and die. And I personally believe, because I've gone through a horrible situation, which I'm still fighting now, unfortunately. My father was killed unlawfully, and it was the same hospital that took us to court and killed him unlawfully, and I've had my inheritance stolen. So it's all to do with money, and it's all to do with our trusts, and it's all to do with our birth certificates.
Yeah,
so
that sounds like an ongoing case that I don't want to get into too much detail about. I was listening to you, but it sounds like you don't want a referendum. You don't think that this decision should be put into the hands of the people. Is that right?
I don't trust them. It's about trust.
You don't trust the general public?
MPs.
No, I trust the public. I don't.
Okay. So you want it to be
decision.
You want it to be put into the hands of the general public. I mean, it is true. This government has just taken over.
Yeah.
Can we fully trust them to make the right decision on this?
This government has only just taken over. This has been going on for a decade, or if not more, talking. You see, I think the whole issue is overcomplicated. Just listening there to our last caller, all I'm saying is there should be a provision in British life where if somebody finds living too painful, there's an option for them to choose to die. I think it's so simple, and it's overcomplicated.
If you're going to take it into that level of simplicity, what you could have here is a situation where teenagers who are going through a tremendous amount of hormonal upheaval, many of which suffer from depression, anxiety, and all those sorts of things, could make a decision that actually it's too much for them, and the government decide to help them take their own life. I'm not sure that's where we want this to lead.
No, but within the terms of this bill that's going through now, there are cautionary paragraphs like if you've only got 6 months to live and the pain is too much,
But even that...
If there are no other pressures from family, right?
Sorry, Imarn,
I was going to say, even that, so that is actually one of my issues. So I think, totally in agreement with you, we should make sure that this, I hope that this bill passes. But my issue is that the nuance is incorrect. And I think this is what's making it quite difficult for people to make informed decision. I'll give you an example. So one, like you said, 6 months, you need to, in fact, I'm pretty sure the word is likely to die, as in you're terminally ill and you're likely to die. Now, let's be honest with ourselves here. There are many people that have been given 6 months to live and then they live for 5 years. So this is where it becomes...
She certainly got a Christmas she didn't expect to get last year.
So this is where it becomes problematic, because then how do you sign off a bill that says, well, if you're likely to die and you've got 6 months to live, one doctor could say 6 months, another doctor could say a year. So then how do we decide? So this is a piece of nuance that unless it's fixed, it's really hard for us to make an informed decision. One other one, it actually said that you have, as long as you've lived in this country for up to a year. I think, again, that's a piece of nuance that's
so you're talking about all the nuances, you're talking about potential unintended consequences and all of these sorts of things that will make it very difficult for the individual to make a considered decision.
And the MPs.
OK, so why would you send it out to a referendum then?
Because I think it's about, first and foremost, the MPs doing their job, making sure that they cover and make sure that the nuance is accurate. At that point, they disclose that information to the public, and then we can now make an informed decision as a result. But MPs haven't dealt with the nuance, and so therefore we're all confused. Sorry, go ahead.
When I say historically, I mean recent history. Referendums have showed us that even with potentially the best intentions, mistruths are told during referendums, and people campaigning on either side will say things that aren't necessarily true and can sway people's votes. Is on a situation like this, do we want to have that sort of dynamic involved?
I think you cannot deny the fact that that will always be a part of life. There will always be mistruths. There will always be misinformation. And it's just the exact same thing. It's the same basic dynamic in terms of why we keep putting this off. Because a lot of people keep saying, well, we're worried about people being coerced. We're worried about, people being harmed and not being sure. All of these situations, they're unavoidable. They're literally going to stay with us until the end of time.
It's kicking it into the long grass all the time. Who's going to make the decision?
That's the point, because we're not being clear.
Parliament's not going to make decisions. Throw it back to the general public. And on the thing about only 6 months to live stretches to 5 years, we're talking about people who are so desperately ill and in so much pain.
But some things can change after 6 months.
They're not going to get better, generally speaking. They're not going to get better. And therefore, their desire to end their life
also, as far as I am aware,
is exactly the same.
If you go down the process of saying that you would like assisted dying because you have 6 months to live and you're fitting all the criteria, as far as I am aware, the minute you sign that, you're not, you can take it back. You don't have to go through with it, and it doesn't have to be done on that timescale. It can be done at a point where you say, okay, when I lose cognitive ability, or I lose my ability to do this, that, and the next thing, and you assign the parameters. Then, interestingly,
that's interesting to know. Thank you.
Interestingly, Dave Sowry's wife wasn't terminally ill, so actually, even if this bill passes in the way that it is now, it wouldn't have helped Dave out with his situation with his wife, and I'm sure that would go for many other people as well that have visited Dignitas from the UK. Tony from Bristol, what is your view when it comes to a referendum on assisted dying?
I wouldn't want a referendum for the simple reason that I think to go forward with it now is exactly what should happen. There should be a vote, and I hope that they would say for assisted dying would pass. And the reason I say that, my father was a fighter pilot in the last war, and at 70 he was sailboarding when he had a stroke, very active man. He survived the first stroke and then went on to go back to be able to drive and all that. And then suddenly he developed terminal spinal cancer. And at the time, he'd also had diabetes. And he went into a nursing home in the February, and I used to take him out more or less every day when I could. And I was his power of attorney. And then in the October of that year, still at the nursing home, his doctor rang me and said, "I'm very sorry," he said, "but your father has had a major second stroke. He's unconscious. He will not recover from it." And he said, and you know how bad we've talked about his legs being really bad. He said, well, they were going black. He said, and the only way we could prolong his life is to amputate both his legs. And I said, well, I don't want that to happen. He said, well, what would you like to happen? And I said, I'd like you to let my father die with some dignity. And he said to me, I agree with you completely. I've put him on a morphine driver, and it should be that he will die within the next few days.
I think, Tony, can I ask how long ago that was?
This was 2002.
So early 2000s. I'm not sure that sort of thing happens as much anymore for various different reasons, but certainly I think back in the 70s and 80s, that's exactly how you got a dignified death, but because of all sorts of other things, I don't think doctors feel as confident doing that sort of thing. But Tony, just very quickly, I hear that you want this law to be passed and you think that people deserve to die with dignity. I'm hearing all of that. What if it doesn't pass, though, and the MPs decide not to pass this bill? Then do you think we should have a referendum on it?
Be a referendum, yes, because I think this is such an important thing that we shouldn't just leave it get kicked under the carpet. It should be debated and voted on again.
All right, Tony, thank you very much for your call. Thanks for all your calls on this. We're going to head to a break now, but next